Is it afternoon yet? Yes, it is. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on a finally slightly snowy day in Davos. I must confess that I've been a little bit wondering if and when it's going to snow. Very much appreciate you coming in. Hopefully we'll have a lively conversation for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to hang around, and we'll try and hang around a little bit afterwards if anyone wants to mingle and chit-chat and share ideas and perspectives. So the topic, as you know today, is framed around exploring the conversation around how do financial services institutions actually sort of deliver the promise with respect to generative AI. I mean, I think you just need to walk up and down the main street here and see how many of count how many times AI is featured just at that storefront. I did it this morning. I counted 20, just walking from the top of the street to the bottom. It's obviously become an elevated topic of conversation in Davos. For those of you who've been to Davos several times, I will just say from my experience that just if I compare the last 2 or 3 years, we saw the voice of AI get mentioned last year and the year before, but it's really part of the ongoing narrative. And I'm sure, like many of you, a lot of the bilateral conversations, let alone the things that happen on stage and informal forums, is the topic of conversation. So we're going to focus on the financial services dimension of that. I'm very pleased to have a couple of really great panelists with me. Rowena Zamora from Gcash and Christiana Riley from Santander. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. My name is Neal Baumann. I have the great pleasure of leading our financial services business globally, which provides me with this unique opportunity to just get a constantly helicopter view around what happens across marketplaces and different kind of financial institutions, whether they're banks or insurance companies or fintechs or investment managers. So I get this sort of helicopter view. I will tell you that one of the biggest conversations, particularly in the last quarter or so, is the conversation we're going to cover today. How do we get the value out of all the investments that we make? And I want to frame it just with some numbers to start off, and then I'll get my friends to introduce themselves and we'll get cracking. We just released our Deloitte State of the AI at the enterprise level report concurrent with Davos this year. And there was one number that really struck me. If you look at the financial services organisations around the globe and how they've answered the range of questions and responded to that survey, fundamentally over the next 3 years, financial institutions are reporting that they're going to increase the level of investment in AI, generative AI and AI-related things by around about a compounding growth rate of about 36% to about $97 billion in 3 years' time. So there's a lot of money in motion around it. Right? And I wonder if we're getting closer to mapping money in motion and value creation. Mm-hmm. So with that, maybe Rowena, get you do a quick introduction and we'll get cracking.
Oh, our mics are working, yeah?
You are?
Hi, everyone. I hope you guys are having a good week at Davos. I hear it's towards the end of the week. Like this is your last big thing to attend, so we hope it's going to be interesting for you. So I'm Rowena Zamora. I lead strategy at Gcash, which is a finance super app out of the Philippines. Can I see a show of hands for anyone who's done work, been to, or knows anything about Manila in the Philippines? Okay, a handful. So allow me to introduce Gcash to you. It is a finance super app in the Philippines. It has been used, or is currently being used, at least they've been used once by 94 million out of 117 million Filipinos. And we're really driven by a vision which is, very simple but very difficult to achieve, which is finance for all, right? So it's an under-penetrated in terms of financial services. It's a country that is challenged with a lot of systemic challenges to inclusion, particularly financial inclusion. So Gcash has really focused on how do we use technology and AI and other similar enablers to bridge that gap. So yes, thank you for having us in the panel.
We're very pleased to have you.
I'm Christiana Riley. I am from Banco Santander, for those who may not know it, the largest bank in the Eurozone by market cap, headquartered in Madrid, Spain. We serve 166 million retail customers across 10 core markets. My role at Santander is as regional head of North America. That's our businesses in the US and in Mexico, which encompass 25 million of those 166 million customers across a range of very heterogeneous businesses, ranging everything from the most sophisticated elements of corporate and investment banking, all the way down to unsecured lending products to underserved segments in Mexico. So it's a very, very broad range, and we touch the economy in many, many different ways. I want to preface anything I say in this coming conversation for the next 45 minutes, Neal, that I am not a technologist by background. I am inquisitive, I'm curious, and I'm looking forward to sharing my observations of how I anticipate.
On that, we have a lot in common.
But I really do look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for joining us. So why don't we get stuck into things? So I'm going to start off with an opening question. As you explore the experiences in your organisation over the last couple of years, let's just say, and you think about your marketplaces, your business opportunities going forward, in what areas of your business do you see the greatest opportunities for AI from a value creation perspective? Maybe, Rowie,
Sure. So when I was introducing Gcash earlier, I talked about the challenges to inclusion. And in an economy like the Philippines, where the national ID system has been rolled out only in the past couple of years, and it's still not completed, where majority of the population are unable to provide what traditional financial institutions need for them to open an account, right? Lack of identity, lack of credit history, and all these other documents that traditional institutions typically require. The challenge is really, how do we provide financial services to the largely unbanked or underbanked population? And in Gcash, we have found very inspiring ways, right, to help the unbanked through AI. So let me give some examples. The first one on inclusion. I'm not sure if many of you know that the Philippines has a very high mobile penetration rate, and we're among the top internet users in the world. And so the question is, how might we use that high digitalization behavior of Filipinos to help address the inclusion challenge? And so they might not have the traditional requirements of banks and other financial institutions, but they have digital footprint. They have digital transactions, which we can use as a proxy to what traditional financial institutions typically require, right? So one perfect example of that is really what we call G-Score. It's an in-house credit scoring model that uses transactional behavior on the app as a proxy to how worthy is this person and how likely is this person going to manage a microloan well, right? And that has enabled us to unlock over $2 billion in terms of microloans to 7 million Filipinos.
Wow.
In the past several years. And that's quite huge in a country where credit penetration has been like in the low digits. Like it historically, before the pandemic, it was 1% of Filipinos have access to credit. And so I think that's that's very encouraging, alternative ways, and that's really based on data and AI. Other ways is really improving the customer experience, right? How do we use data to have a better understanding of our customers? So we have what we call customer affinities, right? So we've grown that to over 50 customer affinities that allow us to understand who are our customers, right? How do we personalize the experience for them? Not just in how they use the app, but what services we can provide for each one of them. And this is very common in the banking industry now. You're not anymore serving a segment of, how many millions of customers. You need to treat each customer as his or her own segment, right? And you can only do that with data. So that's another example of how we're able to use AI, yeah.
So it's been an ability to develop market penetration, to scale
Yes,
market
yes.
penetration.
And using alternative data to get there, yes.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm inspired by that story. I spent time yesterday on a panel talking about financial inclusion, and we were talking about technology as a really, really critical catalyst, both data and data mining and the power of data, but equally smartphone penetration, as you say, the high digitization rate in emerging market economies, and the Philippines certainly one of them. The one statistic that I did take away from that conversation was with respect to gender parity in that journey, and that worldwide, women are 30% less likely to be in possession of a smartphone. So we need to be conscious as we pursue the inclusion journey that we are making sure we're...
Well, and I hope you don't mind, I'll just share something on that gender parity comment. One of the most interesting insights we have is really around, and another panel I listened to yesterday also confirmed this, is that women just need a leg up in terms of access to financial support, right, or access to credit. But because they don't have the documents they need or that are required, what is the alternative, right? And this is something we really studied in GCash, and we're proud to say that more than half of our customer base are actually female, right? And I think the inclusion challenge doesn't stop with just gender parity. Even the urban versus rural divide is one thing.
Yeah.
So in GCash, more than 70% of our users come from the lower socioeconomic class, and over 50% come from non-urban areas. So I think it's really, again, with the data you have and using digitalization and technology as like your critical enablers.
So there's an element here around the opportunity to use AI as almost like a democratization mechanism to reach broader marketplaces, drive more fairness and more equality and more balance around how you sort of cultivate and engage with customers. Yeah.
That's right. Because again, they might not have the traditional requirements, but they have alternative ways for you to profile them, to score them, right? And to reach them essentially through their mobile phone. Yeah.
I'll pivot back, Neal, to your original question. I apologize for
for
the side swerve.
Let's weave around it.
From the perspective of a scaled traditional banking player, what are the opportunities that AI opens up for us? And I think they are broadly in two categories. One is with respect to the efficiency of our delivery and software development and ultimately technology transformation, and the other is with respect to the excellence of the customer experience. Right. On the efficiency side, it's obvious we've been able to improve, and thank goodness, because you told me I have to spend 37% more of my budget on AI over the next couple of years.
Hopefully at least half of it with us.
With Deloitte, yeah, exactly. We can talk about that after the panel. I may need a discount. But we are seeing on that order of magnitude also productivity improvements of our software developers as a consequence of AI-enabled coding, right? And that's the primary use case at the moment on the efficiency side. And it's pretty fundamental. We just have to be sure that we are genuinely reaping those productivity benefits. And then on the customer experience side of things, that's where I'd say, certainly speaking for my own institution, but also broadly what I see from my vantage point in the industry, I think we are really only at the very rudimentary stages, right? Text-to-text chat bots are okay, but not a particularly delightful user experience. And I think as we move into more advanced stages of Gen AI and we think about what we may be able to do in voice-enabled, right, and really getting back to a customer experience that feels a lot more intimate and personal and relationship-driven, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of runway still for us to go.
Yeah, there's an argument, a philosophy, conversation that I often get dragged in these days on this topic, which is fundamentally the inherent promise around the technology is that if the ability to potentially change the productivity yield of a financial institution, right? And when we're seeing these early gambits around what I call basic enterprise AI. We will do this better. We will do this faster. It's almost like you will do that. You have to do that. You'll be left behind if you don't. The interesting thing is, and a little bit to your point as well, Rowie, is where's the opportunity set going forward with respect to a more strategic outcome around this, where you can start to leverage AI as it improves and we get better institutionally in deploying it. What's the opportunities to actually create strategic value to perhaps create breakaway competitive positions in different marketplaces? Do you have any sort of thoughts or perspectives on the look forward side of the equation?
I think a lot of that is going to depend on how the providers of models, right, and how industry is engaging with the availability of models. And what I mean by that is, are we going to need to be making specific strategic choices of going with a certain set versus another? Or are we talking about an accessible, open marketplace in which it's really, and what happens to the data in that construct, right? And is it a proprietary one-to-one relationship, or is it one-to-many? And that is going to, I think, drive how much of the deployment of AI becomes a table stakes versus a source of competitive differentiation.
Yeah. My view on that is, I think there's still a lot in terms of AI providing alternative solutions to systemic problems. The inclusion story is one of them, and I think that will continue for a while. Definitely in terms of operating efficiency of companies, that will continue. There's a lot of, and I think that was also the topic of several panels throughout the week. What does it mean now for talent, right? And I think the challenge to companies is really, it's not about, bracing yourselves to replace human capital with AI. It's about upskilling your talent so that they're able to do complementary things that now to what AI can, I guess, take over and do more efficiently. I think one area that, it's starting already, but one thing that would be greatly impacted by AI is the topic of cybersecurity, right? Unfortunately, AI, as it helps companies, it's also used by, the bad actors. The bad actors. But how do we use customer data? How do we use security tools, right, that can be powered even better by the data we have on hand? I think that's going to be a big space to look out.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was almost going to jump in with that point as well. I was reflecting the panel that I had the pleasure of running last year was about financial crime. And I remember the conversation sort of merged with AI, because the point that I put on the table is that one might argue, rightly or wrongly, that the wave of generative AI that we've seen now fundamentally democratizes artificial intelligence to the masses. The prompt text-to-text kind of revolution, stuff like that. Said another way, potentially weaponizes bad people, bad actors, in an environment where financial institutions are struggling to keep up with the bad actors as they currently sit. Right? There's this sort of, it's almost like there's asymmetrical warfare, so to speak. Right? Any thoughts and perspectives around that dimension? Because when we talk about social equity and gender equity and stuff like that, financial crime is not a small issue with respect to economic leakages in our communities and our countries and all that type of stuff. Perspectives from you, from a Santander position?
It starts with fraud, right? And the much more sophisticated avenues that bad actors will have to perpetrate fraud on unsuspecting customers, on unsuspecting employees. I suspect many of you have heard of some of these really quite frightening case studies of the CEO of an organization will show up on a Zoom call with an employee, raises a whole bunch of interesting cultural issues that I'll mention in a second. But just the scenario is an employee receives a Zoom invitation from the CEO, who shows up as looking like he or she, requesting that individual make a certain payment to a certain entity urgently, because we are in the midst of an M&A process and the payment has to go out now. And it is a Gen AI developed avatar that truly walks and talks like your CEO, right? And there have been a number of very prominent examples of this happening in the US.
No one can walk and talk like our CEO. Joe, if you're listening.
That's not true. I've seen Joe's avatar. It speaks like 7 languages. It's very good. So it's real. It's happening. It raises a number of cultural issues, particularly for organizations who rely on, for example, large offshore outsourcing centers, right? Where you may not have had up until this point the necessity and the urgency for a speak up culture. Because if that person receives the avatar of the CEO in a hierarchical culture of I do what the boss says, they're going to do it without questioning and certainly without going back to do the checks that you might otherwise do if you didn't think you were going to get that. So it's a multi-dimensional, multi-layered problem.
Yeah, well, challenging, I would argue, disproportionately for sectors that are trust and confidence driven. Like we as a professional services firm, the same sort of basis as you guys are. When you're operating, financial institutions trade on trust and confidence, and arguably it necessitates us not just being vigilant or beyond the horizon, vigilant around it, but it also necessitates us being thoughtful around how we inculcate different ways of behaviour with our staff as they learn the new technology. I think you touched on culture earlier. You're sort of hitting on it as well. Why don't we talk a little bit around some of the challenges?
Neal, if I could just jump in on the security, trust and security is kind of the capital, really, right, with customers, especially in an industry like financial services. So 2 concrete examples of how we've seen it to be helpful, right? AI to enable trust and security. Like I said earlier, if you do not have sufficient data, then you kind of use alternative information, right? So in GCash, we have 2 examples of that. The first one is what we call the scam score, right? So again, based on patterns and behaviors on the transactions on the app. A user is assigned a scam score, right, which looks at 2 things. The first is what is the likelihood of this person to commit fraud, but also, and equally important, what is the likelihood of this person to be defrauded? Yeah. So the messaging and the customer education and the campaigns are almost tailor fit based on the profiling, and we've seen it really improve. Kind of rates in that space, right? In terms of customer awareness, vulnerability of a customer, right, due to lack of information and education. The other one, we were one of the first, if not the first, digital platform to onboard customers through eKYC. And I think AI has really enabled us to be more informed about who the customers are and what they are likely as a profile to be transacting with and in the app. Like who do they transact with? What kind of behavior are we likely to see? So I think those are 2 very concrete examples, which I'm sure other banks and other digital platforms also use, that I think have been very helpful in that topic.
Act 1, let's say, out of a 3-act play when we're talking about it. And what we're doing is we're encouraging our people, as you say, to look for opportunities as individuals to reshape how they do their work on a day-to-day basis and how they work as a team. And that's challenging enough, right? But Act 2 arguably might involve more than just document summarization and, we were talking about this earlier. Can someone please respond to my email automatically? That's the basic stuff, and which is important, and we'll experiment and we see lots and lots of banks and other financial institutions report we can save so much percentage of productivity. I mean, the reality, you add it all up, it comes out that way. But that's the stuff we know we need to do. Act 2 could look very, very differently. Mm-hmm. Act 2, we could be dealing with situations where we're having more functional AI agents that are working across processes, and we're saying something like, respond to Neal's email and his request to get a mortgage, and underwrite it and prepare for me a review to sign off around from an underwriting perspective.
And call him and tell him the good news.
That might be Act 3 or 4. But you're right. You understand what I'm saying? We're dealing with a degree of complexity in a fundamentally a talent-based business that we're hitting the wall around. We're going to hit the wall around things that are not just talent challenging, new skills to learn, right? But they're culturally. Yeah.
I'll give you an example, Neal, of that. That again we found to be a good value add. So I talked about our lending services earlier, and how we've penetrated and essentially opened up a market that typically had no other option except loan sharks, right? So now they have access to fair micro lending, and one concrete use case for AI is the collection agent AI. Right? And we found that the success rate of that has been pretty good, pretty high, so much so that it has contributed to enviable NPL rates.
So your AI will ring me and tell me you're late on your loan, and if you don't pay it, will break your leg.
More like before the due date, yeah. And it can carry conversation, right? They're keywords, right? And it continues to learn. It continues to learn based on the conversations that they have, and I think it's very helpful that it has the conversations in local dialects as well, right? So I think that's just one example of how.
I can only subscribe to that we have very tangible evidence in our consumer lending businesses that the prompt communication, however, not a phone call, because if you're overdue on your payment, and you know that we all have caller ID on our phones these days, what has typically happened is you're going to avoid that call like the plague. And the beauty of the new, in part, AI-enabled prompt systems that will engage and keep you in the dialogue and work with you on a potential payment solution is that you don't have to go through the awkward pain of actually speaking to somebody on the other end of the line. And we've seen quite a significant and tangible improvement in delinquency rates as a consequence.
So this is,
and it's another way that we are indeed, genuinely creating value with these tools.
So this is starting to apply principles of behavioural finance to fundamentally
human
address
problems.
Human problems. Okay. Yeah. So, but again, getting back to the change dimension around it, right? How when you start to think a little bit more about Act 2, we're looking over the horizon a little bit now. Are we thinking about this sort of talent change culture challenge? Are we thinking about it differently? Are we thinking about it the same in your mind? Because let me put some context in it. So you're sitting in a commercial lending department and you're asking your little AI buddy to summarise a loan set of legal documents and stuff. I'll probably summarise for you. That's okay. We can do that today, and we can train our people to trust but verify the outcome. We can sort of make them aware that that no AI is ever going to be perfect, and we expect the work to be reviewed and studied, and some intellectual honesty applied to that. That's one element of a change. But when we're dealing with potential AI agents that are spanning end-to-end processes, there's a sort of a different level of sophistication required, where multiple people or multiple steps in the journey might be affected in a different kind of way. Mm-hmm. So as you think about these things, do you see that change, adjustment, culture, that whole mechanism in the enterprise being more just the general direction, continuing the direction of travel, or is there something more thoughtful or deeper that we need to be considering as we sort of prepare the enterprise for those kind of changes?
Again, I'll make the point, if what we ultimately aspire for is kind of a zero-touch loan decisioning process, right? I need the people who are touching that loan decision in a lot of different ways today to be doing different things,
Yeah.
right? To be either part of the solution of having created the zero-touch technology, or to be thinking more broadly around the ways in which, now that we don't have to do the mundane and we don't have to do the box ticking of a loan approval process, how else can I go out and delight that customer?
So I think in addition to upskilling, how we use and the quality of the data that you have, I think is one key consideration, right? Your models will only churn out, based on what kind of data you have. So I think apart from upskilling so that, as you said, they can do more value-adding work, right, instead of be replaced by technology, by AI. I think the other one is also understanding better your role as an employee or as a leader in the issue of governance of data, governance of these LLMs, governance of AI. I think that's a huge topic. I mean, just base it on the topics lined up in this week in Davos, right? Governance around AI and how companies should not just implement it, but know exactly what guardrails you need around that. I think that's a huge change management as well.
Particularly those of us who operate in regulated industries,
Yes,
that bar
yes.
is high.
Yeah.
So I was going to dig into this just for a moment. As leaders in financial institutions, what are you finding you're having to learn differently or lead differently or manage differently as you adapt and adopt to this sort of ever-changing landscape that we're dealing with these artificial intelligence technologies?
Again, I was a literature major, and the fact that I'm sitting here on stage speaking about the application and strategic deployment of GenAI means I think I'm stretching myself and I'm way outside my comfort zone. And I think that's probably the mentality that we need to be role modeling for our staff, which is you're going to be prepared to invest, to learn, to reskill. I don't know how many times we've said it, but you can't stand still. And the degree that you walked away from university with, however many years ago, is only a part of what it is that and all the exciting opportunities that you continue to get to develop and grow.
For me, it's not rocket science. I mean, you're talking about like my personal insight on it, personal journey. It's really how technology, particularly AI, can help solve the systemic challenges, right? That's how I see it, right? Of course, being on your toes in terms of you can't advocate for it if you don't understand it or use it yourself. So that's definitely one very practical way. But I like keeping things simple, right? Be very clear about what challenge you're trying to solve and how technology and AI can help not just address it, but leapfrog, right? Like scale the solution. And to me, that's been a very practical and often effective way of looking at it.
What challenge you're trying to solve, or indeed potentially in the future, what opportunities you can take.
You can open up.
Without.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Final thing before we close off. This has been fantastic, and I thank you both. I want to talk about data a little bit, just for a moment. I think, Christiana, you mentioned earlier around LLMs and what the hyperscalers provide and stuff like that. But we also know there's a really important dimension of this, which is proprietary large learning models and the reality that a lot of, in regulated environments in particular, a lot of what might be the high value of creating stuff is going to be somewhat more proprietary and in the house. And even indeed, many of the other opportunities are going to require internal information to be mapped with, publicly available large learning models. How do you think about the needs around sort of the whole data landscape across the financial institution? Because that's another investment curve that we haven't touched on. That's I think we all know that in traditional financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, et cetera, we have a messy legacy environment that requires in an organisation such as yours, we're sort of building as you're creating your data pools as we're going. But how have you been thinking through that journey? What do you see as some of the challenges, and what are some of the concerns around making sure that we can have constant confidence in the quality, fidelity of our information so we can have the agility needed to be able to take advantage of opportunities as they sort of arise.
Well, as you've been speaking, it's actually given me the answer to the question you asked earlier around the deployment of AI as a source of competitive differentiation. I'm not sure it's necessarily going to be the models, or it may be as much the model as it is, at least in the initial phase of an accelerating deployment of AI, the quality of the data at any specific institution, right? And institutions who have either the advantage of being new entrants and starting and designing their model from scratch in a way that they can maximize the benefit of a clean and structured data, versus incumbent and legacy institutions who've been ahead of the curve in addressing legacy data issues. As a global organization at Santander, we're proud. I talked about the scale of 166 million customers. That scale does nothing for us if we aren't consistent in the way we apply our architecture strategy and the way in which we have managed our data architecture. That has been a very significant lift of the last several years. It's always hard, to speculate where you are on the relative spectrum of that. But it's because of the strategic value of that scale, of that 166 million global customer base, it has been a matter of extreme strategic importance to make sure that we have consistent data architecture that can be deployed consistently across global platforms.
Any thoughts from you as you continue to grow?
On the topic of data, I really think first of all, it's a data quality, and I think I referred to that earlier. Not just how robust, how updated is the data, right, of your customer, and what do you plan to do with it, which is why I think now spotlight is really on data scientists who kind of create the model that you want actionable insight from. I think that's one. So the quality of data and how it's used and the models by which it's processed so that you get actionable insight, that's the first one. The second, I want to offer a point of view, Neal, on what you said earlier about perhaps like the next wave might be kind of bilateral kind of conversations around data use. I'm not sure who among you here are kind of widely impacted now by open finance, but I think that's coming, if it's not already there in some areas. And having a regime where institutions, banks and non-bank financial institutions such as GCash, will be required to share information and data, all under the remit of easier customer experience, will require that there is a level of safety and security and sophistication, right, in the rails that will transmit and share that data sharing or enable that data sharing. So I think quality of data and the robustness of that secure data exchange platform, which if open finance becomes, more widespread than it is now, I think it's really something we need to all think about.
Well, there's open finance. There's also national payment rails, India, Brazil, et cetera, that are building out.
The Philippines is on a QR
That's
common.
Right. Yeah. That they all are forcing mechanisms to create that force greater levels of innovation in the banking sector, right? With data with those kinds of things, it requires you to invest differently around things like artificial intelligence to create some kind of breakaway competitive advantage, right? That's the world, the direction of travel of the world that we're living in at the moment, fundamentally, right? Any final thoughts? What didn't we cover from your perspectives before we close this out? Other than we haven't solved my problem of someone automatically responding to my emails.
I know. I wish I could do that for you between today and the end of the week. Look, I'm a strategist and CFO by training, and so one of the things that I am always looking for as we're rolling out new innovations is the ways in which we can truly measure its impact, right? Yep. It's one thing, to be deploying models at scale, but if it's not really impacting the experience of the customer and ultimately impacting the bottom line of the firm, then what the heck are we doing it for? And so we didn't touch on it in this conversation, but thinking cleverly about how you're measuring the impact of the deployment, whether it's NPS in your customer experience or indeed the productivity gains that you're generating in your platform. But that's the unsexy side of it.
It arguably might become more sexy going forward,
Yeah.
as we sort of think about this sort of proliferation of use case experimentation, et cetera, et cetera. I think most executives in financial institutions are over that phase and they want to move forward and see rubber hit the road from a value creation perspective, right?
That's right.
Final thoughts from you?
For me, I've said this. This is my third time to say it in this panel. Like, be very clear about the challenge you're trying to address. I think is the first thing, and we all know that there is so much to gain from sharp data insighting, right? So the more data you have, presumably the more actionable insight you will have. And if you're very clear about what challenge you're trying to solve, I think in any industry that could be a game changer, right? But again, to reap the maximum benefits there's a lot needed, right? Internally, externally, in terms of regulatory, in terms of cybersecurity. So
The basic economics of AI as well.
yes.
Well, thank you very much again. I really appreciate it. Fun conversation. Please join me in thanking Rowena and Christiana.
Thank you.